Hi, my name's Kelly. I'm a nutritional therapist, and this week I'm here to speak to you all about emotional eating. And I want to share my experience when I used food to just kind of check out of life, and how we can overcome emotional eating and what emotional eating is really telling us. So, firstly, I want to share my experience. So, I found myself sat in a car and I was sat eating a sharing bag of licorice. And I wasn't hungry, it definitely wasn't about hunger. And I sat and I ate that licorice and I enjoyed every single licorice. And at that point in time, I was going for a breakup. My mum had been diagnosed with cancer, and I felt such overwhelmingly strong emotions that I just wanted to check out of feeling any of them. And that really is at the heart of emotional eating. Emotional eating is when we are using food as a way of coping, numbing, soothing, escaping, because we're not able to deal with the emotions that we're experiencing. So for that moment in time, we just want to check out. And that was exactly what I was doing. I was using food to just numb and not think and not feel temporarily, to just be able to soothe myself. And I really have done a lot of work to try and understand why we emotional eat, and why people can be locked in a battle with emotional eating for years and years and years. And what I've come to understand is, so often when we want to change a behaviour, we focus so hard on the behaviour instead of what's going on underneath the behaviour. And what I mean by that is, I have experienced working with people where they're focusing so hard on the fact that they would have been in the car eating licorice and telling themselves that that's an awful thing to do, they need to stop it, that they're missing the underneath of, why am I in the car eating the licorice? Like, what is this actually giving to me? Because as human beings, every time we engage in a behaviour, it's because we're actually getting something from that behaviour. We're gaining something. So for me, in that instance of being sat in the car eating licorice, I felt overwhelming sadness. I felt betrayal. I felt grief. I felt worry. I felt anxiety. I felt so many emotions. And I remember explaining it to my friend. I feel like I'm on a beach and I'm tiny, and there's these waves of emotions and they are huge. And if I even allow myself to start to feel any of them, it feels like they're going to engulf me. And when we're feeling like that, absolutely we want to check out of that. It felt so scary to me to even consider allowing myself to truly feel all of the things that were the bubbling up internally. So I used those licorice whilst I was sat in that car to really check out and be able to just for a moment not feel and chew and experience dopamine from the delicious thing that I was eating, because I personally love licorice. And I was at a point in my life where, fortunately, I was able to observe the behaviour and understand this is a symptom. This isn't the root. I'm not a really awful person, even if I'm a nutritionist and I'm sat emotionally eating the car. It doesn't make me an awful person. It doesn't say anything about me. But what it does do is point to the fact that actually I don't have coping strategies right now for this circumstance. So I'm struggling. And because I'm struggling, I'm turning to something that I know will soothe me, which is food. Because I was able to be objective and look at the behaviour that I didn't want, which was being sat in the car with the licorice, but trace it back to, okay, what's actually happening here is I'm well out my depth. I'm really struggling with these emotions that are coming up, and I don't have the toolkit to be able to process these emotions. Now, in the moment, food was the best tool that I had that allowed me to numb those emotions. But long term, that isn't going to be a helpful strategy to me. So in my case, what I did is reach out to a therapist and say, hey, I'm really struggling with some things that I'm going through at the minute, and I really need some support because the tools that I'm using are either ineffective or they're not long lasting. The way that I was able to identify that is for not penalising myself for the behaviour, but actually tracing it back to what's going on for me right now and being objective and saying, okay, the reason why this is happening is because I'm really struggling emotionally. And so often emotional eating is because we don't have the toolkit. We don't have the coping skills. And so we use food to help soothe, help numb, help escape, but we as a society, we stay locked in the judgment and the criticism around that. I heard this fantastic saying that said, so many people try and change the way they eat by trying to change the way they eat. And what that means is, so many people may have taken that situation and thought, well, I absolutely can't be in the car eating licorice. This is something that I need to stop. So what I'll do is I'll just have a big lunch. I'll make sure that I don't allow myself to go into the shop, and then I'll just have a big dinner, and that will solve it. But that's never going to solve it, because the food was never the issue. If we want to change the way that we eat, we have to understand how we are using and relating to food to start with. Once we have that understanding, we can then process the emotions or the circumstances or the situations. We can gain new tools in our toolkit, and we can legitimately start having food as one of the ways that we can soothe or numb. Because emotional eating isn't something that we want to completely take off the table. Sometimes it's absolutely appropriate to think, I have had a terrible, terrible, terrible day. Today I'm going to sit there, and the thing that I actually want to do, the thing that I'm choosing, is to eat some ice cream. That's okay. That's absolutely fine. But I could also say, but I don't have to eat the ice cream. I could call my mum, I could call a friend, I could call my sister, I could go for a walk. It's not the only tool in my toolkit. I've got a variety. I'm just choosing it. The challenge comes when food is the only way that we know to soothe, or, as in my circumstance, what we're going through is so overwhelming and feels so huge that we feel like we don't actually have any other tools, or they're ineffective in that moment, and so food is the thing that we're driving to. In that case, we want to be able to be objective and kind and compassionate to ourselves, and we want to be able to look at what's going on aside from the behaviour that we don't want. Because then we truly really start to understand ourselves and understand how we can meet our needs instead of criticising ourselves and shaming ourselves for those. So if you really struggle with emotional eating, the first step to really being able to get a handle on this is really starting to notice and name your emotions. Now, when I work with people and I suggest that, quite often they're like, is that it? I'm just going to notice and name? What's that going to do? But it's so, so powerful, because what we usually do is we get stuck on the behaviour instead of the emotion. So if we can notice, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling stressed. Firstly, what that does is it actually has a real calming effect on our brain when we name what we're experiencing internally. But secondly, we start to understand that emotions are just messengers, and they're messengers from our body saying, hey, something's going on here that needs your attention. And the more we shove them down and don't listen, the louder and the louder they get, and the longer and longer it goes on. Me experiencing sadness, me experiencing anxiety, it wasn't wrong, it was appropriate for the circumstance. Me turning to food was a symptom of me not being able to process those emotions healthily. So when we can take the focus off of the behaviour and actually start noticing and naming the emotions that we experience, we start to be less judgmental around experiencing them, and start to get really honest with, oh, I really struggle when I'm overwhelmed, or I really find irritation a challenge to feel, or when I'm sad, I can really see that I'm reaching for food. And once we have that honesty with ourselves of, I really struggle with sadness and it causes me to turn to food, or I really struggle when I feel irritated, that causes me to turn to food. When we can have that honest dialogue with ourselves that's free from criticism and shame and judgment, we can then legitimately start to get to a place of asking ourselves, okay, so instead of using food, how else could I soothe my sadness? When I'm overwhelmed, what else could I do instead of checking out with a glass of wine? When I'm feeling really anxious about something, what could I do instead of sitting in the car and secret eating? But first of all, we have to really be able to get honest about how we're feeling and notice and name the pattern that we're experiencing in order to be able to truly move past it. Something else that I think is also really challenging is so often we make things mean something about us. And I'll give you an example. Let's say I have a friend and I'm experiencing jealousy, and I'm labelling jealousy as a bad emotion. So now I'm thinking, because I feel jealous, I'm a bad person. I shouldn't feel jealous. Jealous is a bad emotion to feel. So I'm making the emotion that I'm feeling mean that I'm a bad person. That then drives us to soothe ourselves, because internally we don't feel good and we don't feel like we're a good person because we're experiencing a quote unquote bad emotion. A far healthier way to look at emotions is that they are quite simply just messengers. And as human beings, we are going to experience an array of them. Nothing means anything. It doesn't mean we're a bad person if we experience jealousy. It doesn't mean we're an awful person if we experience envy. These are just emotions and they're messengers, and they have absolutely gold dust information for us about ourselves if we are able to look at it objectively without making it mean something about us. And this is what I call starting to feel safe within different emotions. When we allow ourselves to just feel things without making it mean something about us, we can process it better and we can move through the emotion better and we can move past it better. But the longer we're trying to shove it down, or we're criticizing ourselves for feeling it, or we're making it mean we're a really bad person, the longer we stay stuck in it, and the more we then turn to things outside of ourselves to help soothe or numb or escape from those emotions, the quicker we are able to get to a place where we don't judge ourselves for feeling certain things. So there's definitely some emotions which are icky to feel: jealousy, envy, mistrust, doubt, anxiety. They're icky things to actually feel. But when we just legitimately allow ourselves to feel those things, we don't make it mean anything about us, we're able to process far more effectively. So if emotional eating is something that you're struggling with, what I'd like you to consider from this podcast is, how do you talk to yourself? How do you show yourself that you are safe to feel the things that you feel? What's your inner dialogue around certain emotions? Do you allow yourself to feel the things you feel? Or the minute you feel sadness or anxiety or overwhelm, are you shoving it down? Are you eating, or are you drinking, or are you really trying to suppress? The longer we do that, the longer we stay locked in a battle with things that actually, whilst on the surface help us temporarily, long term it's not allowing us to process that emotion and moving through, it's staying stuck within us. Some key things that can really help your emotional eating is changing your inner dialogue to one of compassion. Understanding that our emotions are messengers. They have a message for us. And if we can really start to listen, instead of judge, instead of shame, instead of criticize, we can get far further in processing those emotions. It's also understanding that if we want to change our relationship with food, if we want to change our relationship with emotional eating, we can't just look at the behavior or look at the foods. We actually want to change our relationship with our emotions. And if we change our relationship with our emotions, we actually change our relationship with life. And that's where emotional eating no longer becomes this huge challenge that's in your life that's causing you to not be able to reach your fat loss goal, or causing you real deep distress because you're turning to food constantly. You actually realize, okay, this is a symptom. And I can be compassionate, and I can listen, and I can understand what my body and my emotions are communicating to me, so that I can not only get to know myself better, but I can have this really healthy relationship with food. And food can be one of the tools that I use, but it's not my only coping strategy. It's not the only thing that I have in times of challenging emotions. And something that I speak to clients about is, as a human being, we are always going to feel an array of different emotions. The goal is to never feel quote unquote negative emotions. The goal actually is to not feel so bad about feeling those quote unquote negative emotions. When we can be objective, when we can understand that they're messengers, when we can understand that our emotions, they're here to tell us something, we can really start to get to know ourselves better, and we can stop seeing food as the enemy and start seeing it as the symptom. So I hope that's really been helpful in starting to unpack emotional eating, which is a really complex topic for so many people. Take that first step this week. Do the noticing, do the naming without judgment, and see what comes up for you.